When Jonathan Roumie walked through a busy art fair on a downtown sidewalk, most people didn't even notice his presence. He was just another passerby, another face in the crowd. But when he stopped, picked up a painting, and quietly listened to the young woman in front of the booth, everything changed. Because she wasn't just any artist. Sophie Carter was fighting for more than just recognition. She was trying to save her own life. And what happened next became an unforgettable moment. In true Jonathan Roumie fashion, he didn't just buy a painting, he changed her future forever. It was a dark, sterile room. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting a pale glow over the white walls. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, mixed with the faint beep of monitors from the adjoining room. Sophie Carter sat on the hospital bed, wrinkled, with her hands clenched into fists on her lap. In front of her, Dr. Patel adjusted his glasses with a carefully neutral expression. Sophie already knew what was coming. She had heard that tone before. The practiced kindness of doctors about to deliver bad news. "The treatment is working," he said, with a slight glimmer of hope in his voice. "But you will need at least 2 more rounds of chemotherapy." Sophie barely flinched. She was used to the routine, the pain, the nausea, the fatigue. All of it had already become part of her life. But what she wasn't used to was what came next. "I understand your family is struggling with the costs. Unfortunately, without insurance coverage for the next rounds, expenses will have to be paid out of pocket." He hesitated, then sighed. "And they will be substantial." Her mother let out an unsteady sigh beside her. Sophie didn't need to look to know she was fighting back tears. The medical bills had already drained the family's savings. The last round of treatment had pushed them to the limit. And now, this. For the first time in a long while, fear gripped Sophie's chest. Not the fear of death, but the fear of seeing her parents lose everything trying to save her. The ride home was silent. Her mother gripped the steering wheel so tightly her fingers turned white. Her father's voice was hoarse when he said everything would be fine. But Sophie felt the lie. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, her heart racing, she made a decision. She would not be a burden. She refused to watch her parents drown in debt because of her. And then something struck her heart, her art, her passion, her refuge since childhood. If she could create something that touched people, something beautiful enough for someone to want to buy, maybe, just maybe, she could fight on her own. The next morning, Sophie had a plan. She wouldn't wait for a miracle. She would create one. The first brush stroke on the canvas always felt magical. The brush glided, leaving behind soft shades of blue, bold strokes of orange, the colors blending to form something new, something alive. Sophie set up a small art booth on a busy downtown sidewalk. Sitting on her folding stool, she had in front of her a wooden table covered with her canvases, each one a piece of her soul. Her mother helped her set up the booth that morning, but the rest was up to her. Sophie had spent the past few days pouring every ounce of energy into her paintings. She knew this was no longer just art, it was survival. If she sold enough, maybe she could pay for the treatment that could save her life. But hope is a fragile thing. People hurried by. Some looked with curiosity. Others didn't even notice her. A woman in a navy blazer stopped for a second, admired a canvas, but soon shook her head and moved on. A man in a tailored suit and dark glasses read the small sign in front of the booth. "Original art, helping to fund my cancer treatment." He frowned, turned, and walked away. Sophie sighed and clung to the edge of the table to steady herself. The afternoon heat made her dizzy. Hours had passed. She hadn't sold a single piece. She held the water bottle with trembling hands and took a sip. The exhaustion weighed on her bones. A cruel reminder that she was fighting not only the world but her own body. But giving up was not an option. She forced a smile when an elderly couple approached. The lady touched one of the canvases tenderly. "These are beautiful," she murmured, eyes shining with emotion. It was a piece Sophie had painted with her heart, a vast desert sky and deep shades of purple and gold. "How much is this?" Sophie swallowed hard. $80. The lady exchanged a glance with her husband, who nodded with a smile. "We'll take it." Sophie didn't move. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, but now that it was finally happening, Sophie could hardly believe it. She froze for a moment when the woman handed her the money. Inside Sophie, something broke, but in a good way. It was her first sale, her first victory. She clung to that feeling as she carefully wrapped the painting in a paper bag. The couple left, leaving Sophie with $80 and a renewed sense of purpose. Maybe she was just a girl selling art on a street corner, but she was fighting, and it wasn't over yet. The city was alive. Street musicians strummed guitars on corners, their melodies blending with the distant hum of traffic. Tourists wandered, taking pictures of murals painted on the sides of old brick buildings. Business people, glued to their phones, hurried past without a second glance. Sophie sat at her small table. Her hands rested on her knees. She watched the world spin around her. It was strange to be surrounded by so many people and still feel invisible. She had sold one painting, but it felt so far away. Every time someone looked her way, hope exploded in her chest. Maybe this time. Maybe this person would stop to admire her work, not to see her as a beggar but as an artist. Most people, however, didn't slow down. Their eyes only flicked over the canvases before moving on. Others didn't even notice her presence. And then there were those who stopped only to offer pity, not support. A middle-aged woman wearing a floral dress read Sophie's sign and sighed. "Oh, dear," she murmured in a thick voice filled with pity. "I wish I could help, but I have no money." Sophie smiled politely. "That's okay. Thank you for stopping." The woman lingered, her gaze on her. "Poor thing. You must be so brave." Brave. Again that word. She had heard it so many times since the diagnosis, but it never felt right. She didn't feel brave. She felt desperate and tired. Still, she nodded and let the woman offer gentle words before seeing her leave, like so many others. Shortly after, a different kind of customer appeared. A man in a leather jacket and sunglasses perched on his head walked up to her stand. He glanced quickly at the paintings and let out a low, sarcastic laugh. "No one buys real art nowadays, girl. You should try selling prints. Or I don't know. TikTok, commissions maybe." Sophie's hands clenched into fists. She swallowed the sharp reply on the tip of her tongue. She also swallowed the anger burning in her throat. She had dealt with people like that before. People who didn't understand. People who thought dreaming wasn't worth it. "I don't need your advice," she said firmly. "I just need to keep fighting." The man snorted but didn't respond. He just walked away, blending into the crowd. Sophie exhaled slowly. She refused to let frustration win. Somewhere in that city, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, someone would notice her, and that would change everything. On the fourth day, Sophie was exhausted. Her body ached from sitting for hours on that metal bench. Her muscles were weak from chemotherapy. The summer heat pressed against her skin, making her dizzy. She had sold 3 paintings in total. It wasn't enough. Not even close. She tried to stay optimistic, but the weight of reality was creeping in. Maybe that man in the leather jacket was right. Maybe no one cared. And then, out of nowhere, someone stopped. But it wasn't just any customer. It was a journalist. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, carrying a notebook and wearing a press badge attached to her bag. Her brown hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and her eyes shone as she looked at Sophie. "This is beautiful," she said, pointing to a canvas depicting the sunset over the city. "Did you paint all this?" Sophie blinked, then nodded slowly. "Yes." The journalist smiled, pulling her phone from her pocket. "I run an online art blog. I love discovering hidden talents in the city. Can I take some photos?" Sophie hesitated. "Wait, really?" In the next few minutes, the woman took pictures of the paintings, Sophie sitting at her stand, and even the small handwritten sign explaining why she sold art on the street. Then came the question Sophie didn't expect. "What's your story?" Sophie told it. She spoke of hospital visits, mounting medical bills, the decision not to let her parents face it alone. The journalist nodded, jotting down details in the corner of her notebook. "People should hear this," she said. "I'll make sure they do." Sophie didn't think much of it. People made promises all the time. But the next morning something was different. More people were stopping. Not just to look, but to buy. A woman bought 2 paintings at once. A young couple flipped through her canvases, debating which to take. By noon, Sophie had sold more than in the previous 4 days combined. Then her phone rang. It was a message from Lucas, her best friend. "Girl, you need to see this." She clicked the link. It was an article about her. Fighting for art, fighting for life. The young woman who paints to survive cancer. And below, thousands of shares. Sophie's heart raced. This was real, but she had no idea yet how big this moment would become, because the biggest customer of all was already on the way. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as another wave of hurried pedestrians swept through the city. Everything was a blur of motion, people lost in their own worlds, their own problems, their own distractions. Sophie wiped sweat from her forehead, trying to ignore the dizziness rising through her body. Her body screamed for rest, but resting wouldn't pay for chemotherapy. She exhaled, adjusting the small pile of paintings on the table. The blog had helped. Sales were rising, but she was still far from the goal. And then, without warning, something changed in the air around her. A silent presence, a stillness that felt out of place amid the city's chaos. She felt it before she saw it. A tall, older man stopped in front of her booth. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't staring at his phone. He didn't seem rushed for any meeting. He stood completely still, his hands tucked into the pockets of a worn leather jacket, a hat covering part of his face. He wasn't just looking at the paintings. He was seeing them. At first, Sophie barely paid him any attention. She had already seen every type of customer: curious tourists, skeptical businessmen, distracted buyers pretending to be interested. But there was something different about this man. He looked straight at her. Then in a calm voice, he asked, "Did you paint this?" She nodded, surprised. "Yes, I painted them all." He extended his hand. "Jonathan Roumie, nice to meet you." Sophie's eyes widened. She knew who he was, the actor who played Jesus in The Chosen, but also someone known for his faith, humility, and genuine empathy. "I saw your article," he said, "and I had to come in person." Jonathan stayed there for minutes that felt like forever, looking at each canvas, asking questions. Not about techniques or prices, but about what each painting meant to her. In the end, he chose 10. "I want all of these, and I want you to know, your art has already touched thousands, but today it touched me." He paid silently, without drawing attention, without posing for photos. He just left a card with his number. "Call me if you need anything." Really. And then he left, walking slowly down the sidewalk. But there was something different about him. She couldn't quite explain what it was. Maybe she was too tired to think. Her voice was hoarse after a long day, and the last thing she expected was conversation. "Do you like anything in particular?" she asked, not looking directly. The man smiled just a little, enough for her to notice. "Depends," he said. His voice was calm, deep, unmistakably familiar. Sophie raised her eyes. It was rare for someone to ask about the story behind a painting. Usually they only wanted to know the price. But that man was different. Now looking closely, she saw that his face was marked by time, but his intense blue eyes held something steady. There was a depth there, something that seemed to have passed through 100 lives. Nothing about him seemed ordinary. He had a presence, almost spiritual, as if he had come out of a living parable. "What's the story behind this one?" he asked, pointing to one of the canvases. She hesitated for a moment, took a deep breath. "I paint because I have to," she said simply. "It's the only thing I can still control." He didn't answer immediately. He just listened. His silence spoke louder than words. And then she told him. She told about the diagnosis, about the doctors giving her only a little time. She told how every brushstroke was a way to fight, to survive, or maybe to reclaim life. Every candle painted, every sky, was a disguised prayer. When she finished, he didn't offer pity, he just nodded in respect. Then calmly he picked up one of the paintings. It was one of her favorites, a desert landscape in black and white, the silhouette of a solitary man far away. The vast sky, light and shadow, silently battling. It had taken weeks to complete. He studied the work carefully. After a while, with a slight nod, he said, "I'll take this one." Sophie barely reacted. This had happened many times before. Customers who chose a piece, paid, and left. She wiped her hands on her pants and said, $200. The man didn't even take out his wallet. Instead, he pulled out a checkbook. She blinked. Who still used a checkbook? He uncapped the pen, wrote something calmly, tore off the sheet and handed it to her. She took the check slowly. When she looked at the amount, she froze. $50,000. Her heart raced. Her vision blurred. Her breath caught. This can't be right, she murmured. The man smiled, and in that gesture, slightly pulled back the hood and sunglasses, revealing his full face. Sophie's heart stopped. It was Jonathan Roumie, the actor who played Jesus in the series The Chosen, the one her father watched with her every Sunday night. The man whose performance had inspired millions, who spoke with such faith and humility as if he were still the same artist fighting for a role years ago, delivering food as a delivery driver to pay the rent. And now he was there, in front of her, buying her art, changing her life with a simple gesture. She shook her head, confused. I can't accept this, she whispered. I don't deserve. Jonathan's eyes remained fixed on hers, serene. This isn't charity, he said firmly. It's a very good painting. The world around her began to spin. Some people noticed the moment. One or two pedestrians stopped, took a picture, but Sophie didn't care. Nothing else mattered. She looked at Jonathan and saw something beyond fame. She saw a man who knew what it was to fight. A man who had offered his own art to serve something greater, who knew pain, faith, and new beginnings. There in the middle of the street, Jonathan Roumie gave her the same chance. Her hands trembled as she held the check. For the first time in many months, Sophie felt hope. And the craziest part? This was only the beginning. She looked again at the amount, $50,000. Her heart beat fast as if it would burst from her chest. Her hands gripped the paper as if it could slip away. The noise of the city disappeared. Cars, horn, street musicians. Everything blurred. She blinked, trying to see better. She was sure she had read it wrong. But there it was, $50,000. She looked at him, the man with a simple jacket, stubble, clear and calm eyes. He just smiled. Just keep painting, he said. The world needs what you have inside you. Sophie's legs almost gave way. She tried to say something, a thank you, a why, but the words fled, nothing came out, because nothing in her had been trained for this. Life had always prepared her to resist, and that moment, as surreal as it was, hadn't ended yet. In fact, it was just beginning. No one noticed when the city moved on. It was always too fast, too distracted, unaware of the story beginning to unfold right there on the sidewalk. Then the first whisper happened. A teenager with headphones stopped mid-step, tilted his head and looked, eyes wide open. He murmured with an uncertain but increasingly audible voice, Is that Jonathan Roumie? A nearby woman turned with her phone half raised. She squinted, shifting her gaze between Sophie's booth and the bearded man wearing a simple shirt and a gentle look. Another whisper, then another. And suddenly it happened. A flood of people in motion, stopping, heads turning, conversations halted. Someone choked. Another took a photo. And so, the quiet afternoon turned into a frenzy. Oh my God, it really is him. Jonathan Roumie is right here, on this sidewalk. Is he buying a painting? What's going on? Cell phones flashed in all directions. A group of college students ran closer, voices full of disbelief. A businesswoman in high heels almost tripped stepping back, pulling her assistant along. And then came the turning point. A man in a suit, who had passed Sophie's booth earlier without a second glance, returned. What's happening? He asked, approaching. He looked at Jonathan, then at Sophie, then at the pile of paintings. His eyes went straight to the check still in her trembling hands. And when he saw the amount, his jaw dropped. Wait, he just bought a painting? He asked, almost in disbelief. Another woman gasped. $50,000? Was that it? The crowd erupted. People crowded around Sophie, eyes darting between her and Jonathan, trying to understand what they were witnessing. And then, the craziest thing happened. I'll take this one, shouted a man in a blue polo shirt, pulling a cityscape painting and taking out his wallet. Before Sophie could process, another hand moved forward. "How much is this one?" asked a woman, flipping through the remaining works. Within minutes, the paintings that had been ignored for days were being snapped up, one by one. No one bargained. No one asked questions. They just bought. A teenage girl pulled out her phone and turned to her mother. "Mom, I need money. Now I want one before they're gone." Sophie sat there stunned, watching her booth, once ignored, turn into the hottest attraction in town. It was insane. And Jonathan Roumie just stood there, calm as always, hands in pockets, watching everything unfold. Finally, he leaned in and murmured, just loud enough for Sophie to hear, "I told you, girl. Just keep painting." With that, he discreetly adjusted his cap and left, leaving Sophie to watch the scene around her explode into something she could never have imagined. And the craziest part? That wasn't the end. That was just the beginning. When Sophie got home that night, her phone was on fire. Notifications flooded the screen. Ping, ping, ping. A flood of messages and alerts. At first, she thought something was wrong. But then she saw the headlines. Jonathan Roumie buys teenagers painting for $50,000. And you won't believe why. The chosen star helps young artists battling cancer in an incredible way. Teen's art booth becomes a national sensation after surprise visit from Jonathan Roumie. The photo was everywhere. One image. Jonathan Roumie standing in front of the small art booth, holding the black and white spiritual theme painting. It was on news sites, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And the video? Someone had recorded the exact moment he handed over the check. Over 3 million views. Sophie could barely breathe. Her best friend Lucas called first. "Sophie, you're everywhere." "I don't even know what's happening," she whispered, staring at the flood of comments. And then messages started pouring in. Not just from strangers, from buyers, from people all over the country, from all around the world. "Hi, Sophie. I'd love to buy one of your paintings. Do you ship to Texas? Your story inspired me. I want to commission something. Any price. Just say the word. My daughter is also fighting cancer. Your strength gave us hope. I want to buy something to support her." Sophie's hands trembled. Her heart raced. Dozens of messages turned into hundreds, then thousands. Donation requests, interviews, invitations, and then an email with the subject, "Gallery Interest." She clicked it with trembling fingers. A renowned New York curator wanted to represent her. "Sophie, your story is extraordinary. We'd love to exhibit your art in our next show. Shall we talk?" She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart pounding against her ribs. It was real. She wasn't just selling paintings. She had become a symbol of resilience. A month later, Sophie entered the hospital for her final round of chemotherapy. Every bill, every debt, every penny for treatment was already paid. Because of one painting, because of one moment, because a man with faith and empathy stopped, listened, and believed in her. The chemotherapy was tough, but this time she wasn't afraid, because outside that hospital room, a new future awaited her. A week after the last treatment, she received a letter. Handwritten, the era of Jonathan Roumie. She opened it carefully, her fingers trembled. "Sophie, your struggle reminds me why some stories still matter. Never stop telling yours. Jonathan." With tears in her eyes, she folded the letter and pressed it against her chest. Later that night, she picked up a brush and began to paint. Her first official gallery exhibition was scheduled for the following month. Her inbox was full of commissions. Her career was just beginning. But there was one painting she would never sell. The first one that had been purchased. The spiritual black and white landscape, now hanging in Jonathan Roumie's personal collection. A reminder that true faith often reveals itself in silent gestures, and that sometimes the most unlikely encounters change everything.